Hey, good evening. Good evening. Good to see all of you for another episode of Monday Night Live. This is Cindy Baker, your ADHD productivity coach, and we have a good topic tonight. We're going to talk about getting started and why it's so difficult and what to do about it. So, if you're jumping on live, say hi in the chat. Let me know that you are here. And if you're watching the replay, just say hashtag replay and let me know if this topic is interesting to you. So I'm curious in the chat, how many people have trouble getting started? Let me do a quick tech check, make sure I'm streaming. I know it takes a while for people to get on, so I'm gonna jump right in, but if you end up watching the replay, let me know that. Just say hashtag replay in the chat and let me know if you have trouble getting started on things. Like if you just sort of put it off and delay getting started. I think a lot of times the hardest part of completing something is just getting started on it. Usually once you get started, it's easier than you think it's going to be to keep going. But that getting started is hard, but since initiating can feel so hard for our ADHD brains, you may often procrastinate, and you are not alone. It's not just you. Task initiation is harder when you have ADHD because tasks take more energy to get started. And because you're used to doing things at the last minute, you might have even convinced yourself that that's how you operate best. Maybe it's become your habit, it's your MO. And that's true even if the task is very important to you. And so you may find that you can't get yourself started until the point where you perceive the task as an emergency. So are you tired of operating this way? I bet you are. If you sat down and really thought about it. Excuse me. And maybe that's why you're here. Listening to this. So what is motivation? When you're motivated, you have the energy to engage in doing what it takes to make a change. And it could be, getting food when you're hungry or looking for a new job when you need one. Motivation is the desire to make a change, but it's that desire coupled with the necessary energy to take persistent action to make that change. Okay, so you want to make changes in your life, but what frustrates you is that despite wanting these changes, you get stuck, right? Because you can't seem to persistently create and sustain enough energy to take action. And that can feel super frustrating. So starting a task, what they call task initiation, that's the effort required to get the ball rolling on something. And if you have ADHD, that ball at the top of the hill, you're pushing it up, it just seems bigger. And we have to put forth more energy into pushing the ball to get it going. And the ball is so big that internal motivation alone doesn't provide us with enough energy to get started. Science has proven there's actually a connection between dopamine in the ADHD brain and motivation. And when you don't start on what you say is important to you, then you and others, they think you're just choosing not to do it. They think, well, after all, if it was really important to you, you would just power through and get started, right? Not necessarily. It's easy for you to engage in tasks that interest you, so you might fall prey to that that type of thinking where you think, well, if this must not be important, or I'd be doing it. But one of the reasons for your inconsistency in starting important work is that it's a dopamine issue. There's insufficient dopamine released in the executive function networks in your ADHD brain. So in a nutshell, your brain is just not stimulated enough. So you don't start. If you're interested in doing something because of a perceived reward or avoidance of something negative, then dopamine is released. And that's not voluntary. So telling yourself that you should do something, trying to force yourself, that just doesn't work. It just makes you more frustrated, right? So in fact, you'd likely feel more resistance when you try to force yourself. But when you wait until the last minute and there's that impending consequence, like you're going to get in trouble at work or, something like that, then you might become really interested in doing the task because dopamine is released. It's all about brain chemistry and your brain gets the stimulation that it needs. And that's why urgency works. Emotions, even unconscious emotions, impact your motivation to start. And besides dopamine, the other things that get in the way of starting are all the emotions attached to the task. So let me ask you this. Think about something that you are putting off right now. Like get out a little sticky or something. Here's my little sticky. And just, write down all the thoughts that come to mind when you think of this task that you are putting off. Just take a couple minutes and do that. All right, what are you starting to notice about the negative thoughts associated with the task? Because these thoughts are bringing up emotions. Our thoughts are thoughts in our mind and our emotions are connected. And the thoughts are bringing up emotions that are contributing to your challenges in getting started. I mean, let me give you an example. Let's say you're looking at emails and you see one that was sent a week ago. And you can't believe that you haven't responded yet. You meant to. You tell yourself that you're going to reply to her today, right? After all, she's so good about replying to you right away, but then you get stuck trying to come up with a response. You were supposed to send her something last week and you didn't, and you're still not done with it, and so you don't want to have to give an update yet. And you don't want her to know that you forgot about doing your part. So you start down this shame spiral, right? And you can't think of what to write in the email. It paralyzes you, it makes you stuck. So you wonder if the other lady regrets ever asking you to help, and you kind of catastrophize and go and make it bigger. So you decide to wait on the email because you're late for the meeting anyway. So, it's a vicious cycle. So as you can see, emotions can get in the way of starting something, even things that seem, very straightforward and simple. But here is the thing that I want you to really get out of this and remember. Waiting for motivation does not work. Let me say it again. Waiting for motivation does not work. When you say that you'll do something later, do you really mean it? You don't decide when you will do it. You just decide you're not going to do it in the moment. But promising that you're going to do it later minimizes the discomfort of putting it off. I mean, you didn't decide not to write the email. You just intend to do it later, right? So if something's important, don't tell yourself that you're not going to do it. Because you know it's important. You just promise yourself that you do it later. And that's that little trick we play in our brain. So, I mean, here's the deal. When procrastinating, though unconscious, there's often an underlying belief that you'll feel like doing it later. You think something's going to magically change. It's going to make you feel like doing it. But you don't know when that's going to happen, and you don't know what's going to change. So I asked you earlier, to think of something that you're putting off doing. When are you going to do it? If you can't answer, it's probably because you don't want to do it. The task is uncomfortable to do now, and it's not going to get any easier in the future. And waiting for motivation becomes even more of a slippery slope when you feel that shame spiral. because your self-esteem gets a beating, and then you feel even less motivated to tackle that task. So you either avoid doing it or you wait until there's some external pressure or some, sense of urgency that forces you to do it. Besides that whole idea that waiting for motivation doesn't work, overly relying on external pressure doesn't really work either. It has a cost. When you're confronted with that challenge of getting started, you may have developed a habit of relying on urgency for motivation. Because your work gets done eventually, you may even believe that that's how you work best. But while your work may get done, relying on that pressure of deadlines comes with a cost. Urgency, it's not really working for you. You may think it is, but it is not allowing you to be at your best because it has a cost. And that cost can include feeling overwhelmed, lack of sleep, poor health, family problems, mediocre work, making mistakes, not completing work, all of that stuff when that pressure becomes too great. So if you rely too heavily on urgency, it can leave you with some negative emotions. It can leave you feeling guilty and ashamed and anxious and even overwhelmed. So you may expect yourself to create enough internal pressure on your own to get started. You think, well, that's what adults do, right? But you'll need to remember that it's going to be a challenge when you can't create the interest that you need to get your brain fired up, or if your emotions get in the way. And what if there's no deadline? How do you get motivated then? Or what if the consequences aren't scary enough, or aren't painful enough? Then that extra sense of urgency that you need is nowhere to be found, right? It makes sense that we feel anxious, because just below the surface of urgency lies a fear or an anxiety over potential negative consequences. And when the urgency isn't enough or isn't there, then negative emotions like guilt, shame, and anger try to fill in the gap. So let me know in the chat, do any of you relate to any of this? Have I lost you? Let's see. Yeah, I think several people so they can relate. And I've got some workarounds, but it's not going to be a quick fix. So I'll share 3 with you. One is goal chaining, like a chain that's hard to break. It's a lot easier to get going when you set the bar lower. So when you have something that you need to get done, set small, very achievable goals. Break it up into little steps and then chain them together one after another. And why does this work? Because it's easier to deal with emotions like dislike or boredom if you tell yourself that you're only going to have to put up with it for a very limited amount of time. And secondly, every time you achieve one of those small little goals, guess what? Your brain rewards you with a pleasant hit of dopamine. And not only does dopamine feel great, it's that neurochemical most responsible for motivation. And that makes it a lot easier to keep going. And as an added bonus, dopamine regulates our motor movements. It makes it easier to do anything, really. It improves attention. So those little micro goals in the goal chaining process can be very simple steps. You limit the scope of the task. That's one way to do it. You might decide to work for a limited amount of time, or you decide you're going to do a limited number of actions. Like maybe you promise yourself you're going to work on the task for an honest 5 minutes or whatever other suitable amount of time. That means that you're going to eliminate distractions and bring your thoughts and attentions to that task only. And you set a timer, and at the end of 5 minutes, you can choose. You can keep going on the task, or you can choose to quit. But by that time, dopamine will have released and you're cruising on autopilot a lot of times. I do the Pomodoro method sometimes, where I set a timer for 20 minutes and I block out all distractions and I just tell myself I have to do this, but I only have to do it for 20 minutes. And then I can take a 5-minute break. But you can also limit the number of actions that you take. So let's say you need to clear a room. Just commit to putting away 3 items or 10 items, or pick a number. And then after that's completed, again, you get to choose. You can put away another 3 items, or you can choose to stop, and it's okay because you only committed to 3 and you did your 3. So you don't have that shame. Another strategy, it's called if X, then Y. Kind of like goal chaining. For example, let's say you're writing a report or a blog post or something like that, and you say to yourself, if I sit in this chair, then I can turn on the computer. And you're sure that you can sit in the chair, and you're also sure that you can turn on the computer. You have the skills to do those 2 things. You don't have to worry about doing any of them. So camp out on that certainty for a while and feel that power of being able to handle that. It keeps you from getting overwhelmed. Knowing that you can do something helps generate that serotonin in your brain, that feel-good chemical, and that helps you get going. You can, sorry, my nose is itching. You can hack into your brain's chemistry, really, and make it work for you. So let's keep going with that. If you can turn on the computer, you can open the document, right? And if you can open the document, then you can read what you wrote last time. If you could read what you wrote last time, this sounds like, that the children's book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Do you ever heard that? If you give a mouse cookie, he'll want a glass of milk. But if you can read what you wrote last time, then you can write 1 new sentence. Are you getting the picture? So you don't have to do this for every tiny step forever. You just need to keep yourself going until you're so involved in the task that natural rhythm of activity takes over. And then you're not really thinking about it. The key is to remember that you're focusing on the next step, not the outcome. You're just focusing on the next step, not the whole big thing. Put your blinders on. Don't think about the entire task. That's too big. It's overwhelming. Just think about the next right step in front of you. Only 1 step at a time. And what this does is it cuts down on that uncomfortable task to the point where it isn't overwhelming. You also realize that you can stop at any time. So you feel in control. It doesn't feel like it's taking over you. You have the power of brain chemistry behind you because you accomplish each step. Goal chaining, that is the first tip. Another thing you can do is just add more energy, make it more interesting. Many ADHD people find interest in a task that is the most powerful motivator for getting started. You want to do something, you're interested in it, you're going to do it. Try to find interesting parts of boring tasks. For example, I love colors and I love art and creativity. And so adding colors to boring things makes it easier for me. And novelty really ignites our brain as well. So just like interest, novelty is particularly attractive to the ADHD brain. Things that we've never done before are tasks that lead us on a new adventure. Those can be especially motivating. So regularly, for example, regularly changing the types of tasks you're working on, or trying to solve old problems in a new way, or all of that can make getting started just a little bit easier. Make it a challenge. We need to use creative problem solving to find a way to build interest or novelty. So make it a game. Set a time for 20 minutes and race the clock to get as much done as you can. And when the timer rings, you take a break and then reset it and try to beat your score. Because for ADHD people, there's a strong connection between brain stimulation and energy levels. So that means that if you provide that sensation or that stimulation, you can gain more energy, and you can layer different ones on top of what you're already doing. So you can have interest and a game, and you don't want to add things that distract you. Like for instance, the radio or the TV might be distracting, but instrumental music, or maybe a fidget toy, that doesn't really distract your brain. But a lot of times you can use that momentum that you've collected from a previous task to kind of push yourself into action on a new one. So you start with a really small task that doesn't take a ton of energy, and then you move progressively to larger tasks. You kind of like pick up speed. You lose a little bit of energy moving from one task to another, but if you're doing similar things, it makes it a lot easier. So for instance, moving from one writing task to a different writing task, that's easier than going from writing to doing your taxes, And the third thing is just reduce the size of the task. Break it down make it, instead of one big task, a bunch of little tasks. Making tasks smaller does make it easier to start. Make an outline, like let's say you have to write something, make an outline first. That's easier than completing the whole thing. And I know the advice, that you get from neurotypicals can be irritating, but there's some truth to it. Breaking things down into tiny pieces really does work. Because you've got, if you're like most ADHD people, you have short-term memory issues. And that can be something that makes you just ruminate over that overwhelm that you feel. So just focus on the next step. I think I mentioned this earlier. It's just, rather than looking at the big thing, just look at the next step. So, and if breaking down that big task into all the steps is too overwhelming, then instead of identifying all the tasks needed to complete your project, just focus on identifying the first step. What's the first thing I need to do? And that keeps you from getting lost in the details, because a lot of times those details aren't relevant yet. And it leaves space in your brain for what step you're actually on, right? Hide that big giant to-do list, and focus on one step, because we have the ability to forget anything that we aren't looking at. So create the big long list of steps, and once that list is made, just pick out one thing and put that in front of you and put the rest out of sight. And I will add one more very important tip, and that is to get help, get support. So I'm actually have a workshop coming up. It's a free workshop on the ADHD advantage, how to leverage your strengths. And you can get more, let me know if you want more information on that. I have a great group coaching program, and I have a paid VIP Facebook group. So anything that I have, just reach out to me and we can chat, and let me see if I can help you. But whatever you do, don't try to figure all this out on your own. Just get some help. If it's not with me, with somebody else who knows how your brain works and can help you with that. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope you got some actionable tips. Let me know in the chat if you got any questions or comments. I see several comments coming in, and also replay people. Go ahead and comment. Don't just say replay and then say nothing else. Let me know what you're thinking. If you have any ideas to add to my tips, if you have questions, takeaways, give me the emojis, whatever you want to do. That helps a lot. So I will see you all next time. I hope you have a great week, and bye for now.